Steve and I just finished wrapping up this job. We put a neutral safety switch in the Jeep behind me, and what a pain, right, Steve?
Yeah, it was a pain. Some of the things to note on it is you got to take the drive shaft, the forward drive, front drive shaft out just for access to get to the electrical connectors in the shift selector linkage. So when you pull the vehicle in, it's in park, and the shaft that comes up through the transfer case, through the transmission case, that the linkage connects to, the bracket, has a 13 millimeter bolt on it. And on the shaft, there's a flat spot that faces, if you're underneath looking at the side of the transmission, it faces the transmission, the flat spot. What you need to do is once you take the 13 millimeter bolt out, and we talked about that in the video earlier, you need to turn the transmission shaft, the flat spot, so it's facing the rear of the vehicle or close to the rear of the vehicle. And that retracts the selector parking pawl linkage in the transmission so that when you're trying to drop the valve body down, it's not binding up. We had trouble with that, and it actually bent our park pawl little linkage. We were able to straighten it out. And the main selector shaft, the main selector shaft that comes up through the transmission case was kind of frozen in there. So when they have them on the bench, they can bang on the shaft and lower it and press it out that way. You don't have that option when you're doing this in chassis. So we were trying to pry down on the valve body, and we ended up bending that a little bit. And once we got the valve body on the bench, you can remove it easily after we change the switch, and you can straighten it out. And we needed to do that. Unfortunately, we reinstalled it with it being bent a little bit, and it did not have enough throw to put the park pawl engaged. So we ended up dropping it down again. Fortunately, the second time around it had a zipper on it, came right out. But that was the pitfall. So when you're doing this job, after you take the linkage off of the transmission selector shaft coming through the transmission case, you need to turn that flat spot towards the rear of the vehicle. That retracts the park pawl linkage, and then when you can lower the valve body down, it's not going to bind up. If you can find a way to get up over the top between the body of the vehicle and the shaft sticking through the case and try and pry down on it, because they're just frozen in there until you can get them to come down. The guys, when they're doing them on the bench, they just take a hammer and tap them down through. You don't have that option when you're doing it the way that we did it on this one. But we were able to straighten everything out, no problem, and got it all back together, and fortunately everything's running fine. And from taking the valve body out and putting the service and the filter and everything, we used close to 8 quarts of fluid. Just over 7 quarts we used to get our level where we want it. And when we had it running on the lift to make sure everything was good, we had to disengage the
there's the traction control.
Yeah,
but shut it off.
Shut it off so the wheels would spin, and the reverse and everything worked good. When we had the linkage bent a little bit, the shifter cable was binding when it was going into park. But once we removed it and straightened everything out, everything went really smooth with it. One last thing, before you put your linkage on, you get everything back in place, you can put vice grips on the top of that shaft sticking through the transmission case and manually turn it. Grab onto your drive shaft and make sure your parking pawl engages when it's in park. That's critical, because then you don't have everything back together at that point. So it's pretty stripped down at that point. We put the valve body in with 3 bolts and then made sure that was engaged properly the second time around. So it is not an easy one, and good luck to you guys that are going to attempt to do it.
Yeah, so now we'll roll into the video, show all the steps we took along the way, but we kind of wanted to put this in front of the video to tell you everything we ran up against and what to watch out for.
And we did have to lower the 2 exhaust flanges. They're the 15 millimeter bolts we talked about with the square nuts on the top. We did have to lower the exhaust for access to get the valve body out. It's very tight, but we did have to do that.
All right, let's start the video.
All right, so we got the vehicle up in the air, and we're gonna remove this cross member assembly. It's like a skid plate that's underneath, and it's not supporting the transmission. The mount is over here holding the tranny and the transfer case up, so you can take this off so we can have access to the pan. And once we get this off, we're going to see if we have enough clearance to drop the pan down without lowering the exhaust. And it's going to be pretty tight, so we're going to check in about that. This is 18 millimeter bolts. There's 3 of them. There's one here, there's one over here, and one on this side. They have welded nuts on the inside, so you just need to remove them. You're going to need a 1/2 inch setup with an 18 millimeter to pull these out. And we're going to start pulling these down now. Okay, now we're looking up at the pan here, and it's really overhung by the exhaust. And I don't see us getting this down without lowering the exhaust, so we're gonna get the light up, and we're gonna have to get disconnected 2 exhaust converters from the flanges up here and lower this down. And even though we can only have about 1 inch of space to lower it down, it looks like that's what we're really gonna need to do this. We're gonna try and drop some bolts down and get the pan down and see if we can get it off. And then we'll know. And if we can't, then we're gonna have to lower the exhaust. So let me get the setup for the drain in the pan. These are all 10 millimeter bolts on the pan. We're gonna drop it down and drain it this way and get the fluid going into a bucket without making a mess. Well, that's the plan anyways.
Yeah, right.
And then we'll know if we can get at these bolts. We have access, it's tight to get to the bolts from up underneath here. We can use a 1/4 inch swivel, but is the pan gonna drop down with the filter and the valve body? That is the question. And that may not be the case. So what we're gonna do now anyways is we're gonna spray all of the bolts on the flanges up here for the exhaust in case we have to take them down, and let the penetrating oil work for us, and we'll start dropping this down. We got a 10 millimeter bolt tucked up here, 1 tucked up here, and 1 tucked up here. We used a 1/4 drive swivel socket to get in here. It was so tight, we actually just wedged this in between the pan and that a little just to give us that, and the bolts were super tight coming out. And then we used a wrench on this one over here. And then the rest of them, we were able to get the regular 10 millimeter 6-point on and crack them all loose. So right now, we're gonna leave this one, and we're gonna take all the rest of them out and have the pan drain down this way. And that's how we're gonna go about doing it. And we're hoping that we can squeak the pan out without having to deal with the exhaust, and we're gonna know that very shortly. So we talked about the 2 back here that we needed a 1/4 drive swivel, and then we needed a 10 millimeter wrench to take this one off, and we have to walk it off the whole time. We can't get the swivel in there. We cracked all the rest of these loose. Now we're gonna start lowering it from the front and drain into the pan here. And hopefully we're not gonna make a huge mess. We cracked all of these loose previously, so I'm not just cracking them loose with the gun. You don't wanna break these. Okay, after we crack this one, we should start getting a little fluid starting to come out. All right, go over this one here. We're leaving that back one in. Now here. All right, so we got our 2 back ones in over here, and it's obviously stuck there, so we're gonna put a little pry bar up in here, give it a little pry, and get some fluid coming out. Ah yeah, we're gonna make a mess. I already see it coming. Oh, there we go. Very slowly, start cracking this thing loose.
Why they don't put a drain plug in these, I'll never know.
Yeah. We're taking this bolt out here, and we got one more over here to take out. Trying, and then at this point, we're gonna find out if this pan's gonna come out or not gonna come out. shoots, he scores. We had to take the pan and wedge it up like this to get it to slide out. This heat shield is pretty much the difference of what's going on here. Almost like if we could wedge this exhaust down, it's got a little flex to it, that would help us. But we were able to get this down. Whether you wedge a little piece of wood in between the floor right here just to push down on this, a whisker, probably get the thing out. But I had to pull the pan in this position here, and then it rolled down past here to get it out. We're gonna unbolt the filter and get the filter down on it, and then we can show you how to do the filter replacement. And this has silicone on the gasket. We have to clean all of this off and get this all clean and get our new gasket adhered. Here's the magnet. It's got a little bit of fuzz on it, not a lot. You're looking in the pan to see if we have any metal or anything. We'll show you better in the light. It looks pretty clean in here. We're looking for clutch material, and we're looking for metal residue, and that looks pretty clean. And you want to inspect that when you're doing your transmission service to know pretty much how your transmission is. So, okay, so we got a T25 Torx bit over here and over here, and we already cracked them loose with the ratchet. I don't like to zip anything out without cracking them loose. And we're going to drop this filter down, and it's going to pour some fluid out. And make sure you get these screws in a special spot so you don't lose them.
Time to go fishing.
Got it. Now here's the suction tube on the filter. This is where all the fluid's going to come pouring out over here.
Yeah.
So we're going to gently pull that down. I'm trying not to make a mess today, if at all possible. Yeah, there it is.
And he misses the pan.
No matter how hard you try. Little splash in the face, a little on the floor.
My 89 Wrangler is a lot easier to work on. It's like a big long tractor. Steve's got his P-pads in place.
Yeah.
Back to the filter.
So we got some silicone stuck to the transmission case here. We're going to clean this all off. We're going to wipe all this down where our gasket material is going to go. Just wipe the pan down. We can wipe all the valve body down here. And Tony has more plans for me today. We need to take this valve body down and change the neutral safety backup switch because the Jeep has a intermittent starting issue, which is a common problem with these. And I hate to say it's common, but it does seem to happen a lot. So we bought a new neutral safety backup switch, and we're gonna go over disconnecting some electrical plugs that we need to take off, and we're gonna drop the valve body down to remove and replace the switch. Tony bought an OEM Mopar switch on Rock Auto and very reasonably priced. So we're gonna clean this up right now and try and get it so that we're not dripping all over us. And we're gonna go over disconnecting these 3 electrical plugs on the valve body that we're gonna show you that we're gonna take off. And then we're gonna unbolt the valve body. And we have all the torque specs to rebolt up the valve body. And we'll go over all of that with you guys as well. All right, so we have these 2 switches up here that we have to disconnect, 2 electrical connectors, one here and one here. This green one has a red slide clip that we have to slide over to get it to unlock. And we got our mirror up in here to see it. And the clip is gonna come back from this side here from the back and move forward. So we need to get, I'm gonna get my hand up in here, Tony, to slide this clip back and just clip back, and then we can push on the clip up here, and that's gonna release the connector. I gotta get my hand up in here somehow to get this thing to unplug, and it's kind of difficult, to be honest with you. Okay. All right, that one's up.
Now there's one on the other side of the tranny like that. We need to figure out how this one's gonna come out, and I'm not 100% sure yet. All right, we just pushed this little red indicator up, and I think this is just gonna be a squeeze tab. And we're gonna have to probably pry up underneath this one as well. This may take a couple of hands to get in here to do this. Because you can push on the tongue now, and I know that's releasing it. I just need to try and grab it to pull it up. And it's not really coming up. I'm gonna have to get a screwdriver underneath it while I'm prying it. So we use a little pry bar like this to get underneath the plug and push. We have to push on the red connector. The top of it right here at the same time is prying down on the connector, and we're able to get the connector out. So that one's disconnected, that one's disconnected. Now we need to come over to this side and disconnect this one over here. So this brown one here, this connector here has the same red slide connector. We have to slide over there to unlock it. Then we can push on the tongue. And you have to kind of get underneath these things to get them to come up. But you have to push the tongue down at the same time to release it. I don't know if you can hold the light. I'm gonna try and get two hands in here to push down on the tongue. There it goes. Okay, it just came up. And so this connector here, you need to push down on the tongue right here and then get underneath it and give it a little pressure and it comes right up. So now we've got all our electrical connectors disconnected. So we have our selector shaft that comes up over here, and right here comes up through the transmission case. And there's a bracket that connects to it over here. There's a 13mm bolt that goes through it that holds the bracket on, which is connected to your shift linkage here, your selector linkage. So we're gonna remove that 13mm bolt. We're using a quarter drive ratchet. There's a nut on the other side that is embedded in this bracket, so you don't need to put a wrench on it. We're gonna take this off right now, and then we're gonna wiggle this bracket up and get it out of the way. And there's a lock nut that's on the shaft that we have to turn counterclockwise so that the shaft will be able to drop down when we remove the 10mm bolts from the valve body to get this down. So we're gonna go ahead and crack this loose right now. And I don't know if Tony can hold this light, and I can, my arm in here. It's cracked loose, it wasn't too bad. We're gonna take the bolt out. Quarter ratchet seems to work well to get in there. When we put this all back together, we're gonna have this all never seized. It's dry, the bolt, and it's hard to try and get penetrating oil up in there. It's just not finger tight yet, finger loose yet. All right, we got the bolt coming out. Gonna wiggle the shaft off here. It feels like it's a little rusted on, so we're gonna get a little pry bar in here. Now the bolt, this is the square nut that's on the back side of it that just came out, that goes on this. And we're gonna get this so that we can put it back on after. We'll never seize this all up. And it doesn't feel like there's a lock clip on the top, so this should just pry right off. And we're gonna have to get a bar underneath here and wiggle this, and we're gonna soak it with penetrating oil right now. Okay, so we've had to take the pry bar and put it up in this position in here so that we can tap this up. And as it's coming up, you'll see how it's coming up. It's kind of rusted on there, so. There it comes. Okay, the shaft is a little rusty up here, and it goes into this female hole on this bracket here, like this. So we need to get this cleaned up so it's going to go together easier. There's a flat spot on the back of the shaft so that the bolt will go through and align this housing to go back on. So before we put this all back together, we're going to get this all cleaned and get it so that this will wiggle down nice and clean. So it's in the proper position right now, and we removed it, and we're just going to get everything cleaned up, and it'll go together smoother with everything never sees.
Right.
Oh, it's just rough there, huh? It's not smooth. That's why I grabbed the rag a little bit.
Yeah, it's like in the hole. And
That's clean there.
it's like fuzzies.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right, so we got, it looks like 16 bolts, 10 on the outside, and they're all 10 millimeters that we're gonna pull down. And there's 2 solenoids that are up in here with springs, so we gotta be careful when we pull down. Now this back bolt down here in the back, this one, you can't really get the screw gun in here, so we cracked this one loose. I cracked all of these 10s loose by hand first, like we always do. We're gonna drop all these bolts right into the pan here. And the rest of them, after I crack them loose, I should be able to get them with the screw gun. They're all the same length. Okay, we're going after the middle ones now. Okay, we got 1 left, 2 left. Here holding it on. Nope, we didn't crack that one loose. Okay, the valve body's starting to lower down now. We'll let it drain a little fluid out. We've already made a mess of the floor, so yeah. All right, we left 1 bolt in the back. We backed it all the way out. The valve body's hanging a little, and then we caught a couple of threads on it so that we know how far down where the valve body is going to drop. Now, all those electrical connectors that we unplugged all have rubber seals on them that are also holding this in. So we're very gingerly going to try and catch some edges on this thing and just lower it down gingerly to get it out. You don't want to pry and damage anything here. So we're starting to lower down. I'm just going to work it around slowly. Try and catch a little edge here. The fluid's coming out. Just going to let that drain. Double check, we got all our 10s out except for this center one here. Of course, the light's right in the way from me prying, but why wouldn't it be? It feels like there's something else holding this thing. Okay, so we got our last bolt here. We're taking this one out. Now we couldn't, you have the electrical connector on this side over here,
and you have two connectors on the other side, plus the shaft of the selector shaft coming up through the case of the transmission. That is holding the valve body up in place. So we took this pry bar here and very gently hooked it underneath the corner right here and just rolled it a little bit to break the seal on the rubber plug there. And I'm taking the last bolt out right now. And we're gonna get a couple extra hands here. And we're gonna pry down on this thing very gently. So unfortunately, we can't get the valve body all the way out because it's hitting the exhaust. So we have to take the two bolts out of the exhaust flange over here. And they're 9/16. Well, I think they were originally 15s, but they're routed down to 9/16. So we're able to put a wrench on this one from the bottom, but we can't get this one. So we're gonna clamp this with vice grips and then go downstairs and take off with a swivel, a long extension, and a 1/2-inch drive ratchet or a long 3/8 ratchet and get this off. So we just sprayed this with penetrating oil. I'm going to try and clamp these vice grips on here and then go downstairs and unscrew it. All right, you want to try and, I'll get over there and try and pry. And
I think we got enough room now. We might be able to just
let's
wiggle
watch
this
the
thing out.
solenoids. The solenoids are gonna come springing out of there.
Can we get this forward a little bit?
yeah, get the light over here first.
Yep.
Where do you want to watch it from the top? I mean, I could put my finger on it. Maybe I'm not on it. Am I near it? Is that where it is?
Yeah,
It's not more.
it's almost fucking down into the case.
Yeah, I don't feel it.
So Steve and I just got the valve body out of the transmission.
Yeah.
How fun was it?
We lit a stick of dynamite and exploded it out. No, really. We had to turn this shaft like a quarter turn, but it really didn't turn a quarter turn. You can look at the flat spot on it, and it didn't move that much. And we had to turn it, looking up at it, we turned it clockwise.
Yep.
And this is what was holding us if we didn't do that. It had to release the park ball over here. So we got the park ball to release, and this is completely rusted up. We have to clean this so it looks like this to go back up in place. Grease it all up, and then we're gonna change the NSBU switch, which is here, and get this thing back changed over. We want to lubricate all of our O-rings so that this all slides back up in place. And then we're going to lubricate this O-ring as well, because this was a bitch coming down.
Yeah,
unbelievable. So, you know, and when it coming down, we lowered it to a certain point where we were able to take the two shifts on, servos out, and they were round servos with springs. We took those out, and those are going to have to slide back up in place. We can get the valve body up into a certain position, and then we're going to slide those in and slide those up, and we'll go over that with you. But right now we're going to clean this all up with sandpaper, nice and clean, and we're going to unbolt the switch, which is a Torx bit over here. We'll tell you what size. Change that, unplug the connector on the switch, and we're going to change the NSBU switch out, and we will come back to you in a minute.
So the solenoids that we were just talking about, the two little canisters, there's one here and there's one here, and they go in the front and they live right up in here. So you want to keep them on the right side. So we laid these out, you know, left side, right side. It's on the other side of that can. When you put these back in, you're gonna want to put them in the right position. We ended up taking the drive shaft out of the way to get a little more clearance up and in there to turn that shaft to unlock this little clip right here.
So,
All right, so we're gonna change the switch over here now. So we got one Torx bit bolt that goes in here. We took out, and it's a T25. Yeah, T25. Took this off. We slid the clip back here. We're sliding this connector back off. Kind of tight. Pull this up out of the way here. And there's another connector down here, it looks like, that we have to pull this out. And I don't know if we have enough slack to get this out. No, we don't. So let's get a little pocket pick. I'm gonna get out my finger.
Now we got a little pick, pull that back. Okay, we got a little pick here. Try and get this to unplug. Okay, we got that off. We're gonna slide this up just now, put this on the side. Now we wanna clean this and we're gonna lubricate this O-ring with either a little Vaseline or something, because this is gonna go up into the case of the transmission, and we need this to be in a good position where it's lubricated and it's gonna fit right in, so that we're not gonna have a hard time putting the valve body up. And this is the monster that we've gone to change right here. And this is the root of all evils today. So
$28 part from Rock Auto caused all this. Well, it's a new part from Rock Auto. We paid like 28 bucks for it, but yeah, this little under $30 part won't allow you to start your Jeep if it fails. That's what I meant to say.
all right, we're gonna clean this all up here with sandpaper, lubricate this, and then slide our new one down. So let's get this all cleaned up first. Okay, so we cleaned up our shaft with the wire wheel. So we get all the rust off of that. And we got a little lubrication on this now. We're gonna slide the new switch down past the seal. And then we're gonna line this thing up where the bolt hole is over here. And then it looks like it just sits down onto this pedestal like this, the way it goes, because it can't line up with, yeah, it looks like it goes into that notch right there. Yeah, it does, because it sits right there. And yeah, okay, so that's lining up. Now we have to slide this back over the top of it. And that lines up. We're gonna line up the connection, plug that in, slide our lock clip on it, make sure it's not coming back. We got this little tiny one. All this stuff can be pretty brittle in here after it's been inside the transmission for a while, so you gotta be careful with it. Okay, that clicked. That's locked in place. We got this down in place. We've got our bolt here. We're gonna pop back down in place. This was really not tight all that much, so we're just gonna give it a little snug once we get it in place. That's about it. We're gonna clean up our seal right here, get some Vaseline on this. We're gonna put some Vaseline on this seal down in here. We're gonna get some Vaseline on this and this one as well, so that when we put this all back up into the transmission case, we have to line up the parking pawl lever here, and that's gonna go into the female part of the parking pawl, and we have to turn the shaft clockwise a little bit to release the parking pawl to let this out. Otherwise we couldn't get this out. It was just very stubborn coming out. So this is gonna come out with the valve body here. So now with this clean and lubricated, this seal clean and lubed, this one clean and lubed, and this one lubed, this should slide back up into the case a lot easier than it did coming down. All right, we're feeding this back up into here. We're lining up the shaft with the hole in the tranny. Now we can only get it up to this point, and we have to grab those two solenoids over there. Need a second set of arms here. Yep. Do one at a time, Ryan, so that we know. Okay, so we got this one. Yeah. It's got to go up like that on this side. Yeah. All right, oh, wait a minute, we didn't line up the shift linkage first.
So now we've got the valve body back into place. We're gonna throw a couple of bolts in it.
And we have to line up all the things with it, and we gotta make sure that we catch these with like a quarter ratchet to make sure that these things go in correctly.
And we were able to do this, the solenoids, we did place one on one side, one on the other side. We kept the side specific.
And it takes more than like one guy to do this.
Yeah, it took a couple of hands. Remember the springs face down, so they lay on top of like the
The valve body.
valve body.
So we got the valve body back in place. We want to go over some stuff with you. You're gonna have to drop the exhaust to get this down. We have there's two bolts on each side on the flange, and they have square nuts up on the top, and you have to put vice grips on them to grab them. And we took the tire off of the passenger side here so that we could pull the skirt up to access the manifolds there. And we just put vice grips on them, and then we took them down from the bottom there. 15 millimeter bolts. Some of them kind of corrode down to a 9/16, so we were able to get the 4 of them out. And then that lowered the exhaust down on it because you don't have clearance to get the valve body out. You have to drop this down, and we wanted a little more clearance, so we actually we took the 3 nuts off of the transmission bracket here, pardon me, for the tranny mount bracket, and we slipped a socket in there just to let it sit up in here for place. So we have this all up in the air right now, and so it really gave us some good clearance in here. Now, a lot of videos, there's only a couple of videos about this. This is a difficult job. One of the videos we've seen, the guy never took the drive shaft out. You know, to get up in here, to look at the shaft up here that we've got all clean now, there's a flat spot on the back of the shaft. We had to get vice grips up there to turn this shaft into a position, and it's difficult, very difficult with the drive shaft in the way. And for the amount of time it took us to unbolt the drive shaft, we had 4 15 millimeter bolts here in the front, and then we had a half a dozen of these 5/16 bolts in the back. It was well worth taking it out. It's self-explanatory on how to remove the drive shaft, but it gave us more access to get in here. And something we really want to go over with this is the parking pawl on this has a detent cable that runs basically above this plate here, and that comes down with the valve body. When you turn the shaft on the valve body, comfortably the shaft is pretty much, the flat spot is pretty much in 12 o'clock to 11 o'clock position. And that means right now when the flat spot is in 11 to 12 o'clock position and you grab the drive shaft back here, okay, you can't turn, it's locked in place. You have to make sure that that is in place. So to get the valve body down, we turned the shaft up here, we turned it to like 1, 2 o'clock position, okay? And that allowed us to pull this down, and the detent cable slid out from the parking pawl. To put it back in place, when you slide it back up in place, you have to turn that shaft so that the cable goes back in and locks in the parking pawl. And we did not get it on the first try. So we got it on the second try. So you're trying to guide this valve body back up in place, get those solenoids back up in place with the springs in the right sides and keep that correct, and then guide everything up in place. And then after you get it up in place, we caught 3 bolts. We caught one here, and one in the back, and we just hand snugged them. So the valve body is bolted up, okay? And then we turned the shaft on the transmission, the main shaft here, and it did not catch the parking pawl because we could not get the drive shaft to lock in place. So we took it back down, lowered it back down, and then lined it back up, and then got it to go in place. So basically, when you have that parking pawl turned when you're looking up and you have it turned clockwise at 2 o'clock position, that's how you take the valve body down when it's at like 1, 2 o'clock position. When you put it back up in place, it has to be in that place, because then when you turn that shaft counterclockwise, it moves the rod out and locks it into the parking pawl position. You can't hold that and line it up. It's a weird design. So we didn't catch it the first time. We caught it the second time.
but we wanted to go over an overview with you. We did have to lower the exhaust to make this happen, and we did use our jack and jack up the transfer case, and then just threw a spacer socket under it just to hold it up for access reasons. So we also have the bolts, you can see them all loose right now. So there's like 16 10mm bolts that hold this thing up in place. We only have to take the 10mm bolts out to lower it down. The shaft that goes up through the case is steel, the case is aluminum. It was kind of oxidized in there. So we had a hard time pulling this down. So what we used was a crow's foot bar, which I'd like to find that to show you what that was, which is right here. We used a crow's foot bar like this, and we had it underneath the case, and very gently we pulled down on the valve body in the case, but while you're trying to push down on the shaft. When the transmission is out on the bench, normally you just tap the shaft with a hammer and push it through. You can't do that if you're trying to do this in chassis like we are doing. So you gotta have a little patience with it and a little time with it. So, but we did get it out. And once we got all of our seals and greased up O-rings that we showed you on the bench over there with the valve body out, it went up pretty easy. But remember, the parking rod that is attached to the detent cable here is, once you put it up in place and you turn the shaft counterclockwise, it slides the rod over, and that's what locks it into the parking pot. That is critical. Do not go any farther with this job until you know that you can move that shaft with vice grips, small vice grips, and that your transmission has locked into gear. Because if it's not lined up, you're gonna have to take it all back apart. And right now we're at that point. We're gonna tighten all these 10mm bolts up, and then our torque spec is 105 inch foot-pounds. If you're talking, anytime you're dealing with this on a valve body, you gotta make sure you torque this. Don't just run these things up with a gun or try and hand tighten. At least get a torque wrench and torque these at 105 inch pounds. We're gonna torque these at 105 inch pounds. Then we're gonna install our filter up in here with the 2 T25 bolts and tighten that up, and we're gonna get this thing back together. Okay, so we got all of our 10mm bolts that we ran up with the quarter impact gun row, just so that they touched. We got 105 inch pounds on our torque wrench here, and we're gonna torque these. 105 inch pounds is not a lot. Hear it clicking right there, we're good. And we're going to tighten these all down, and we're going to go around and check them twice. And let's count them out. So that we did 3, this is 4, it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 10 on the outside. And then we're going to go on the insides one. We took this one out. There's 1. It's 2. 3. 4. 5. So you get 5 on the inside. So now we're going to go and recheck them again to make sure we got them all. 1. 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 on the outside. Now we got these other 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we got this valve body torqued, and we're very comfortable with this now. So now we're going to start doing some reassembly. We have our electrical connector up over here.
that we can plug this thing back in. Oh, can you see that, Tony?
No, not really.
All right, we're gonna go over that. We'll get in there with the light. We'll do that. We'll plug that back in. We got 2 connectors on this side. We're gonna mount our shift linkage here. I mean, since we took this drive shaft out, we get a lot more room. It's made it a lot easier. With the exhaust down, it's gonna be a lot easier to put the transmission pan back up with the filter. So at this point, I think we're gonna, we'll get the linkage on the transmission. We'll get all the electrical connectors plugged back in. And then we're gonna get the transmission filter back in. So we're gonna get the light down and we'll show you how you can get this connector back over here, and then we'll come over to this side. Okay, so we got this connector over here. We're gonna put this down. See the red connector? After we push this down, we gotta slide that locking clip over there. So I'm gonna pull down on it. And if it's down correctly, we should be able to slide the clip over, and the clip just slid over in place. So we got this one locked in place now. Now we're gonna come over onto this side over here. I'm gonna try and get the light up here so you guys can really see. So we have our linkage here, and we have our shaft, and here's the flat spot on the shaft. It's on the back side. So if I'm looking at it, it's facing the case that way. And we have a flat spot on our transmission linkage right here. So we're gonna line this up, put this back on first. Now, with the drive shaft in the way, this is an ass ache. So, you know, we took this off, and it's maybe an extra step, and maybe you can do it, you know, without doing this. All the power to you. But so now we lined it up, and it just fell down in place. Now we're gonna get the mirror. Now, when you reach up here, you can feel the shaft sticking through the top of the linkage here. And we got the bolt that we got to push through there. Now here's our electrical connectors over here. So we have these 2 electrical connectors. We have to tuck them back underneath the shifter linkage here. Feed these back in place. And we're gonna push this one down. And we should slide the red clip back over. And this one, push this one down. And then this has a lock that slides down, so you know that it's locked in place. So now we're gonna put the bolt back in place over here. It goes through here, which we have right here. It's a 13 millimeter with a square tip. We're gonna go and wire wheel this, and we're gonna never seize it. And we're gonna put this back in place, so we'll show you how to go back up there with this. And then as far as the sides of the transmission, the valve body is torqued at this point, and all of our connectors are back in place. And once we get this bolt back in place, we're at the point where we're at like a filter change now. We're gonna mount our filter, put our new gasket on with our pan, and then we can lower the transmission back down, because we put a socket in here to give us some space so you guys can see really the space. Now, if you lower the exhaust without jacking the transmission up, you're gonna have half this space right here. So this is just making it a lot more accessible. These bolts for the back of the transmission pan really kind of suck to take out with the 1/4-20. Oops, sorry. Yeah, these were really tough to take these 3 bolts out. So now with the exhaust down and the transmission jacked up, we got a good 2 inches, 3 inches in there, so that we'll have room. So right now we're gonna wire wheel and never seize the exhaust bolts that we have to take down, which is 4 of those, and then this right here, and then we'll get this stuff in place, and we'll show you and come back to you. Okay, so we put the bolt in for the shifter linkage up here, and we'll get the mirror up here so we can show you the back side where the nut is on the corner over here, and it's a square nut that moves into the linkage. So we caught that, we never seized it, everything's threaded in. Now we're just gonna tighten it up with the 1/4 drive ratchet with the 13 millimeter socket on it. And after we get this tight, we have all our electrical connectors back in, the linkage is on, the connector on the other side is on. We're gonna mount our filter with the 2 T25 Torx bits, and then we're gonna get our pan reinstalled, and we are finally going back together. So let's tighten this up right now. I said, we never seize that shaft so that it's nice and clean. Pardon me, we used, we wire wheeled it, and then we put that little Vaseline on the shaft and the seal to go up through the place. Now we got it back in place, and we're just tightening it up. And it's, the flat spot is pretty much, looking at it this way, is pretty much at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock position. Okay. Okay, we got that all back in place now. This is still good. We never took this off, so we are good. We're gonna start mounting the filter now. Okay, so you can just take a little bit of tranny fluid, put it on your seal here, just so this pops in nice and easy. This is gonna go up, and you got a couple of torque bits that are gonna line up. You got one here, so you wanna make sure that this thing pops up evenly in place there. I'm gonna catch one here. We got one down here. Making sure that stays up in place. Okay, they're both, tighten them up even. Just a little snug on it is all you need. Okay, filter's back up. Now we'll wipe it down. Plate here. Now we got some schmeg over here we got to clean off with the razor. Get that so that it's nice and clean. And there's some silicone on this. We're gonna need a razor and scrape that off. Making sure the plate is, the bottom of the transmission is nice and clean for the gasket to meet. And you know, now that we have the exhaust disconnected, we really have some good room up here, which is great. So the only spot we really look like we gotta clean is right here. So we're gonna get a razor and clean that up, and we'll get our pan cleaned and ready to go. All right, so we got a thin coat of gasket on our pan here. Line up our gasket. Looks like it's gonna go like that. I like putting a thin coat of grease on. It sticks the gasket down. If there's any imperfections in the pan, it kind of sticks and seals it a little bit so you get everything settled down. Gaskets, Tony had set the gasket down on a flat surface because it was all rolled up in a ball basically. And we let it sit while we were doing the job at room temperature, and it really flattened it out nice for us. So now that we have the exhaust down on it, this is going to be very easy to do the install, which is nice. You can probably just squeak it up if you're doing a transmission service without dropping the exhaust. It is tight. We're not going to say it ain't. You may have to put a little bit of a block between the floor and the exhaust pipe just to try and gain you 1/4 of an inch, and that's probably all you really need to drop it down. It is very tight. So we've got this all set. Tony has all the new bolts, the original bolts, put a little never seize on them to go up in place. And let's go install the pan right now. The pan is a little corroded. It ain't rotted out yet. You know, when you do the job, you probably want to inspect your pan to make sure it's not rotted. It's a little scaly, but it ain't rotted yet. And we're gonna grab some 10mm bolts here. Probably try and catch 4 of these. Okay. Pan is gonna go on like this. Oh, what a dream with the thing down, huh?
Yeah.
Let's try and get our 4 corners going. And we'll get all of our bolts started before we bolt anything down. We're going to catch all of our bolts before we tighten anything down. All right, let's get our tools set up and we'll catch all the rest of these bolts and come back and torque them up. All right, we're tightening up all the bolts now. We got them all started. You still need the quarter drive socket and extension set up with the 10mm swivel to get the back ones. We're just going to snug them up. And the back 3, you have to, that was my head I just whacked. The back 3, you still have to get by the exhaust, but it ain't too bad with it lowered now, you know. Just snug these up. The rest of them we can get with the straight socket. You don't want to over torque them. Okay, got that there. We started every one of them before we snugged anything. Get them all down here. As we're tightening it, you can see the grease oozing out from the top here, so we know that we got a clean flat surface. You can see the grease oozing out. We just use a thin coat, we're not caking it on. That's a cute little pan, huh, Tony?
Things hammered. It's New England for you.
All right,
So you're replacing that next filter change.
and we're snugging these up. You know, we played enough with this thing today. Okay, I'm going to double check our tube in the back that we needed the swivel quarter drive on. All right, we get the filter in, we get the pan all back in place. Wipe this thing down so it don't look so sweaty. And we need to install the drive shaft that we took out back in place. And then we're going to jack this up, pull our socket out, and then retighten our mounts at the back of the transmission, and then reinstall the exhaust. That's all we got left. And then we're going to fill the transmission up. We're going to start by pouring 4 quarts of transmission fluid in it, and then start it and run it and start checking our level. All right, we're tightening down the bolts for the front, 15mm for the front of the drive shaft. You're gonna rotate the drive shaft down so you can get on them with the ratchet set up. These bolts have Loctite on them. I never sees these. Okay, we got all the bolts started on the back side over here. Tony can show you them. Now he's gonna put a bar in here to hold this, and I'm just gonna hand tighten those 5/16 bolts over there, and the drive shaft's done being installed. All right, we get the exhaust up, the 4 bolts. Took 2 of us to do it, And we're tightening up these bolts for the cross member right now. Or it's not a cross member, it's just a shield. And we're gonna lower it down, put the fluid in it, and we should be good. All right, we're finally at this point. We're putting 4 quarts in, and we're gonna start it up, shift it through the gears, and then check our fluid level.
Thanks for watching the video. Hope you liked it. If you have a question, leave a comment. We'll reply back to you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks.